This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault. On today's show, we are doing our second look into the Best Picture candidates for this year's Oscars. I've been doing this since the first season of ContraZoom way back in 2016. Each episode, we look at 3 to 4 of the nominees and the chances they have to win each of their nominations. On today's show, we'll be breaking down the odds that Killers of the Flower Moon, Barbie, and Maestro all have to win. It's pretty simple. We will label each nomination for a movie as a frontrunner, dark horse, long shot, or just happy to be there. This is the second episode of the series, and over the next couple of weeks, we'll break down the rest of the Best Picture nominees with exciting guests before doing our Oscar draft and predictions episodes. Last week, we covered Oppenheimer, Anatomy of a Fall, and The Zone of Interest. Joining me today is Kyle Garzon, whose podcast Once Upon a Time at the Oscars is currently on hiatus, but you can read him over on ContraZoomPod.com, where he recently reviewed the new Marvel show Echo for us. He was last heard on episode 228, Oscars 2023, The Way of West Tarn Sadness. Welcome back, Kyle. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Dakota. How are you?
I am very good. It's one of these things where, like, I feel I need to have you on more than once every year. So this is me offering a formal apology that I have not invited you in a whole calendar year back.
No, I kind of like the annual aspect of it. It really gives me something to look forward to. Because, like you said, my podcast has been on hiatus for quite some time now. So this is just like, oh, I can't wait. I get to podcast again.
Well, we'll have to have you on this coming year, maybe like on a A24 episode or something like that. We'll have to figure something out.
Sure.
So before we get into the show, I do want to briefly talk about how just in this past week, the Oscars announced that they are adding a new category for the very first time since 2001, and that is Best Casting. Not a ton is known about how qualifications will work, but it'll first be handed out in 2 years at the 98th Oscars in 2026, with the rules coming out the year before. Kyle, what are your thoughts on this announcement? This is pretty huge news in the world of Oscars.
I'm so excited for this. I think it is so long overdue, and this is such an important element of filmmaking that kind of has been pushed to the side when it comes to the Academy. I can't wait to see how it's going to work and the intricacies of.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting because we don't know how it's going to be handed out. So is it going to be something like what movie has the most famous names in it? So if we were to look at like this year's nominees, would something like Oppenheimer or Barbie be the front runner because, you know, it's chock full of really famous faces? Or is it going to be something about more of the lines of maybe who is new or emerging talent that's getting their big shot and sort of handling these lead roles, whether it's something like Anatomy of a Fall or Past Lives? I really don't know how this is going to work as far as predicting this category goes. Do you have any sort of thoughts on maybe how it might take shape?
I think in my mind, I would like to see it kind of run parallel with the best acting categories. Not in the sense that the best actors are going to immediately win best casting, but the Academy looking at what roles are being played in a way where you're like, nobody else could have played them.
Mm-hmm.
But for like the majority of the cast.
Who would you have as sort of like a front runner maybe for this year then, if that was the qualifications? I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, I feel like it's got to be Oppenheimer just because it's such a stacked cast.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so many almost like cameo roles in that movie, but each one, when I was watching it, I never felt like I was like, oh, there's Rami Malek and he's gone. He had his one line and he's gone. It felt like they were playing the characters they were meant to be portraying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely going to be very interesting to sort of see how it all shakes out. I think it's going to be a whole lot of speculation until they announce the rules. And then I think once we know what encompasses the rules, I think we're going to have a much better idea of maybe how things like predictions as far as who's going to get nominated, who's going to win is going to work out.
Yeah, and not to promote another podcast while I'm on yours, but I don't know if you've ever listened to the Academy Museum podcast, but they did an episode not too long ago about casting, and just they talked about um, the importance of that when it comes to filmmaking. And I wonder if them being the Academy Museum, if that kind of offered a little bit of insight to the format, I guess.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I did not. I don't listen to that podcast, so I will link to that in the show notes for people to check out because that sounds really interesting. I'll have to look into that myself. I think maybe the big reaction a lot of people had was this was a bit of a curious award to add, because if you were to sort of take the temperature of both what I feel like a majority of the industry wants and then also what kind of fans of the Oscars want, I think the biggest award that people want to see at is some sort of stunt or choreography award. In my opinion, combining the two and calling it best choreography, so that encompasses both, fight sequences and dance sequences, would be the ideal category to add. And we don't have that yet. And another one I know it would be popular, some sort of recognition of voice or motion capture performances as well. That's long been, ever since Andy Serkis didn't get any sort of nominations for his Lord of the Rings work as Gollum, I think people have sort of been clamoring for some sort of performance-based Oscar that is not just purely on-screen acting, and we don't get either of those, which is certainly very interesting. Do you have any thoughts on maybe different categories that they should consider in the future, or did they miss the mark, or was best casting the right one to add at the right time?
It's funny, those two that you mentioned, the choreography and the voice acting. As soon as the casting category was announced, I made a post that was like, now we just need stunts and voice acting. So you nailed it there. It's interesting. While the Academy is trying to be more popular with like mainstream audiences with their most popular film category that they were doing, I don't know if they're still considering that. Um, it is interesting that they leaned toward a casting category instead of something like choreography or even voice acting that I think is more recognizable by a mainstream audience. That being said, though, I think that casting is something that every single film requires.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, every movie has a cast, and that's such a major part of creating that film. So I think this kind of is the most important and most overall, like it has the most reach.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it, is every film automatically by default has a casting director, which means they are eligible for this award. Whereas things like some sort of stunt choreography or voice acting, it would be a much more limited niche award, almost in the sense of something like I would compare it to best original song. Not every movie has an original song in it.
Yeah.
So you're limited to basically what movies have original songs. And then from there, you have to, funnel it down even further to which ones are good enough or qualify or all those sort of things. Whereas as long as you meet, the best picture criteria as far as, releasing in New York and LA for 2 weeks and whatever the other qualifications are for releasing a film. If you're eligible for Best Picture, you will be eligible for Best Casting as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean best original song, if you compare it to that, I mean, honestly, that's one of the categories where if you're death racing, you end up watching movies where you're like, okay, is this really necessary?
As someone who watched Flaming Hot last night, you're telling me.
Yep.
I had one more thing to say about this category. Oh, yes. Doing a bit more research into it, I realized why Best Casting was picked. And that's because casting directors have been members of the Academy for several years now, since I believe the early 2000s. So it feels like they had an internal lobbying, the ability to internally lobby for this award, whereas stunt coordinators or dance coordinators, however you want to, use the term to run those departments, are not members of the academy as of right now, unless they also are, in different branches. Like someone like Chad Stahelski, the director of the John Wick movies, who's also a stunt coordinator, is like, I believe, also a member. So, you have someone there, but he's not specifically in a stunt branch. So I wonder if we got this award because of internal lobbying, and it might take a little bit longer than we expect to get any sort of other award, because they're not actually members of the academy, because they obviously are going to be after their own internal interests first before they are external interests.
Yeah, that makes sense. If there's no branch for either type of choreography, then I imagine no matter how badly people want to see that as a category, it just will never come to fruition.
Yeah, that was my biggest takeaway, where it sort of was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. I'm like, oh yeah, they're probably not in any rush to do that category, because they're not getting internal pressure from them. Because before, you had all these casting directors who were able to vote on the final Oscars, but I don't believe they were able to vote on any of the nomination process. And they were like, well, if you have us here, what's our point? What do we do here?
Yeah.
So let's do something about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think this means that you and I both have to become members of the Academy and really
Mm.
push for these stunt and dance choreography categories.
I would love that. I don't know if I have the qualifications for it, but I'm there with you.
Look, it's time that we learn how to dance, Dakota. Which honestly, that's like my favorite thing lately. When a movie has a dance number,
Mm.
I'm so excited every time.
Yeah. Yeah, if we were to do a sort of some sort of a choreography award for this year, I would assume that something like Barbie would be nominated. I wonder if I'm trying to look at like other ones that might be included. Mission Impossible would probably be there, obviously, because whatever Tom Cruise movie comes out is going to be, the front runner for that. John Wick 4 maybe. But it would be sort of interesting, or maybe The Color Purple as well, because that's got a whole bunch of dance sequences in that too. So I'd be very interested to sort of see what would be the breakdown of like stunts to dance in a Best Choreography award. That would be very interesting to look at.
Yeah, I forgot that it included like stunt choreography. So when you mentioned Mission Impossible, I haven't seen it yet, and I was like, oh my god, when does Tom Cruise dance in that? That sounds awesome.
We're talking risky business here.
Yeah. Or Tropic Thunder.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
Oh, but Poor Things.
Yes, yeah, Poor
That.
Things
Oh,
would probably
man.
be nominated as well too. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe. There's not a ton of dancing in that, but there is certainly some very memorable dancing.
it's so good.
So before we get into this, I want to know how your own personal Oscar death race is going, including shorts. I've now seen 37 of the 54 nominated movies, up from 26 last week. So I definitely put in a little bit of work this week with 11 new movies. So where are you at?
First of all, calm down. Every time I come on your show, you're further than me with your death race. I'm at 25 movies right
Okay,
now, so
that's fair. That's respectable.
I'm trying to pump
Uh,
through.
do you usually finish?
Yes,
Okay.
every year since I've started, I think I started in 2019, maybe, and I haven't missed it yet.
That's awesome. I would definitely say in the last 4 to 5 years, it's usually been pretty easy. There's always like one or two movies where you're sort of panicking and being like, all right, when's this going to become available to rent or stream or something like that, or isn't it in my theaters? And then, by the time the Oscars rolled around, everything eventually sort of works out. So you spend like weeks being anxious and stressed out, being like, when am I going to be able to see this? I don't know if it's going to come out. And then it shows up. So it's usually a sort of a last minute ditch. I know right now I'm just sort of waiting for Perfect Days to come out. I think that's the main one
Yeah.
that I don't have any access to as of right now, that I'm just waiting for the theatrical release to come out my way.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that one. There's a few more that I'm still like, oh, I don't know where I'm going to find these, but I'll make it happen. I make it happen every year. um, when you mentioned last minute, brief story about last year, I I had so much free time last year, and I was like, this is going to be cake. I can watch a movie a day and I'll be golden. And like the last week before the Oscars, I got immensely busy. And I remember the day before the Oscars, I was on a film set for like 14 hours. And when I got home, I had like 6 movies to watch, and I watched them all back to back. I finished Puss in Boots 3 minutes before the Oscars started last year.
Wow,
And
that's
that was my
crazy.
last movie. So hopefully it's not that that tight this year, but we'll see what happens.
That's crazy. That's sort of what a friend of the show, Paulo Bautista, is like. Every year, he always tries to finish up the weekend of, and he'll be like messaging, being like, "Oh, the Oscars are starting now. I've got like 5 minutes left in my movie," sort of thing. So he like always just gets it in under the wire.
Oh, I don't know why we stress ourselves out like this. They're just movies, but
This is fun, right? We're having fun,
yeah, we're
right?
having fun.
All right, so let's get into what we're here to talk about. So the first movie that we're going to talk about is Killers of the Flower Moon. So this movie is directed by Martin Scorsese, and it is about when oil is discovered in 1920s Oklahoma under Osage Nation land. The Osage people are murdered one by one until the FBI steps up to unravel the mystery. So, as mentioned, this is Martin Scorsese's latest film, and it was nominated for 10 awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Scorsese, Best Actress for Lily Gladstone, Best Supporting Actor for Robert De Niro, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, Best Production Design, Best Costume Design, Best Original Score from Robbie Robertson, and Best Original Song, which I'm definitely going to butcher how to pronounce this, but I believe is Wahazazi, A Song for My People, which is heretofore what I will be calling it, because I will not attempt that again. I probably should have practiced it a couple more times before recording. Quickly, before we get into this, what did you think of the film?
Haven't seen it. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh,
I'm just
okay.
kidding. I've seen it.
Moment heart attack there.
No, that would be awful. I overall I enjoyed it. I thought it was a little too long. I thought it was very much a Scorsese film. So I mean, I was pulled in from the beginning, and I was along for the ride. I was a little disappointed at the point of view a lot of the film takes place from, and it by the end of the movie, it kind of left a sour taste in my mouth, if I'm honest.
Okay. That's fair. I was very disappointed with Scorsese's last movie, which was The Irishman, and so I was a little hesitant going into it, but I was really curious by the subject matter, watched it, really loved it, and then I ended up getting the book after I saw the movie and plowed through that, and sort of made me appreciate it even more because of just how many details that he sort of pulls that were, one little sentences from the book, and he was able to make into some really nice character moments and help add to shape the fabric of the film. So I totally understand that, there's definitely some issues with it. It is not a perfect movie in terms of representation and things like that. But I think all things considered overall, I think it is a masterful achievement. Even if I do also agree that it's a little long, but then, after reading the book, I was like, oh man, they could have included so much more stuff. Maybe it's the type of movie that needs to be broken into two, but I'm definitely not a fan of when they do things like that.
Not for this.
So I'm glad he managed to contain it into one and not make it a part one, part two, because that just would have been frustrating. But yeah, I was a fan of it.
Oh yeah, and I mean, like you said, not a perfect example of representation, but also a story that probably would not have been told otherwise. So, and it's good that you get someone who can get the the money and the manpower and everything behind him to tell the story.
Yeah, yeah. As listening to another podcast, Classic Movies Live, and they were talking about how you don't often will get a movie like this would not often get made, especially with a $200 million budget, where unless you have someone like Scorsese's name behind it, really being able to push. And in all things considered, I think Scorsese did his absolute damnedest to try to be as inclusive and representative as possible, even if he does have his own blind spots as well.
Yeah, and his awkward cameo that I'm not a huge fan of.
I understood what he was going with that,
Yeah.
but he is not an actor. That is true.
Right, right.
All right, let's talk about the first category, which is Best Picture. This is a very interesting one for me because I sort of feel that there's two movies at the top, and then there's 3 to 4 movies in the next range. And I'm sort of putting Killers of the Flower Moon in that next group of 4. So technically I'm calling this a dark horse, but I really don't think it has any real shot because there's so many movies in front of it, depending on how you rank it, especially the two I'm putting at the top, which is Oppenheimer and The Holdovers, that there's just not really much of a path for it to win. How are you sort of categorizing this movie?
It's interesting. I haven't seen The Holdovers yet, so I'm excited now, hearing that you hold it in such high regard. But I was kind of tying this up with Oppenheimer as a front runner.
Mm.
Um, Again, that's with me not having seen a handful of the other Best Picture nominees, but I think this is definitely one of the uh, more likely movies to walk away with it, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's probably a decent way to frame it. Whereas like there's a small handful that has zero shot whatsoever, and then obviously Oppenheimer is the most likely. And if you were to sort of be like, all right, if everything goes wrong for Oppenheimer, who's sort of next up in line? I do think that Killers of the Flower Moon could be one of the ones that sort of steps up. The reason why I have Holdovers number 2 is because I think it's such a crowd pleasing movie that it's going to be, the number 2 or number 3 movie. It's a preferential ballot, the number 2 or number 3 movie on just about everyone's ballot, and that could be a way for it to rise to the top of the crop, if everyone's number ones are not Oppenheimer.
Wow, I really need to see The Holdovers.
It's a really entertaining movie. I highly recommend it.
And short.
Relatively speaking, yes. When you're comparing it to Killers of the Flower Moon and Oppenheimer, it absolutely
Yeah,
is short.
that goes a long way with me nowadays.
All right. Well, let's talk about Best Director. And so we've got Martin Scorsese. He's an absolute legend. He finally won his first Best Director award for The Departed, which was now almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
And I know it's crazy. But he's up against some pretty stiff competition this year, and probably what I would call one of the best groups of Best Director we've ever seen, and that's Justine Triet for Anatomy of a Fall, Christopher Nolan for Oppenheimer, Yorgos Lanthimos for Poor Things, and Jonathan Glazer for The Zone of Interest. So I really like this group of nominees. I think it's a pretty well-encompassed group as far as where the talent lies. And obviously, once again, we're going to be saying this a lot, just as we said last week on last week's episode. Oppenheimer is going to be the first name out of our mouths for most of the night. And so I think that Nolan is obviously the absolute front runner for this. But I think that there's a little bit too much competition, and I'm putting Scorsese down as a long shot just because I think the bar for him is so high.
Mhm.
When you're not comparing Martin Scorsese to Christopher Nolan or Yorgos Lanthimos, you're comparing Martin Scorsese to Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and Goodfellas and The Departed. And as much as I really like Killers of the Flower Moon, does it stack up as some of the best of Scorsese's career? Not really. He has so many highlights that it's tough to really say that. And I think that if he was to win another award, he's going to need another movie that sort of cracks that like Mount Rushmore of Scorsese films. What about you? How do you feel?
I think that was a great way to put it. Um, Fantastic movie, kind of a good Scorsese movie, though.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But yeah, he stacked up against some incredible directors. It's it's hard for me to be like, oh yes, Scorsese, he's like number 3 in this category. That sounds so weird, but I kind of had him as a dark horse, but now I'm leaning more towards like a long shot like you. Um, I loved Yorgos Lanthimos so much with Poor Things
Hmm.
this year, and like you said, Christopher Nolan is just a powerhouse this year.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a very tight category, but I do think the fact that Nolan, having never won before and possibly have been making his magnum opus, that the stars are really going to align for him this year. Where it's not just hey, sorry, we didn't award you for Interstellar or The Dark Knight or whatever. Insert your favorite Christopher Nolan movie here that you think he should have won Best Director for. I think this is a very worthy win for him, and would be one that is very much celebrated by everyone.
Yeah, weirdly, like the most digestible Nolan movie,
Mm,
even though it's 3.5 hours long. Maybe not that long, but it's long. It's
yeah,
bizarre that of all things, this is like, oh yeah, this is the one that most audiences will sit down and watch, understand, and enjoy.
which is also really crazy to me. I know we're getting on a bit of an Oppenheimer tangent here, and that was last week's episode, but the fact that it's also a movie about physics and there's quite a lot of science talk in this movie, and it's one of those things where it doesn't bog down the script. And as an audience member who was never good at science, it's not like, wait, what are they talking about? I don't understand. They do such a good job of keeping the terms technical while also letting the audience come along for the ride and never sort of feel like they're falling behind. And yeah, it does have the signature, non-linear Nolan screenplay, but like I think we're so used to it now that there was never sort of any question of like, wait, what's happening when, and who is what, and all this sort of stuff, and all these time jumps. You always knew exactly where you were. And so I think that he was able to sort of combine this really technical talk with the non-linear timeline and have it a biopic about a scientist from 100 years ago, and somehow it is a winning formula, which is still crazy to think about.
Yeah, I mean, never had any issues keeping track of what time we were watching, right, Dakota?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I did it.
Man, I don't know what it
um,
is. I struggle with that. Uh, even in this. So props to you and the rest of the audience, I guess.
maybe it's because I watched it twice. I don't know.
Oh, that'll do it.
Yeah. It always does help unlock something with Nolan films when you watch it a second time, because you're not just like focused on trying to remember who is who and what timeline you're in.
Yeah, and hear the dialogue clearly, which wasn't an issue this time. Thank God.
I agree. Yeah, it was definitely his best mixing that he's had in
Yeah,
years.
for sure.
He finally listened to the complaints.
Finally.
All right, let's move on to the next category, which is Best Actress. And we've got Lily Gladstone here. And I'm putting Lily right up as a frontrunner. Now, originally she was being submitted for supporting actress, and then they switched it to lead actress, which I'm worried might hurt her a little bit, because the screen time, you can look it up as far as what the statistical analysis looks like, and obviously Leonardo DiCaprio has the most screen time, and then Gladstone is sort of in the same range as Robert De Niro, and De Niro's in supporting actor, and so it's definitely a bit of a tricky situation where, are they going to vote for someone who is a proper lead, or are they going to vote for Lily Gladstone, regardless of that? Because she does turn in a very strong performance. The other thing that might be working against her is that it is a very quiet and still performance. Now, I know I've seen some people online complain about, well, she's sick half the movie, she's just lying in bed. I don't think that's an issue at all. She's barely that's barely a portion of her character's arc, and two, that still takes a lot of acting to be able to communicate with just facial expressions and by listening and all that sort of stuff that she does so well in this film. But how do you stack her up against Emma Stone, who is also, I would put as co-front runners? I would put Gladstone as a front runner tied up there with Emma Stone. And for me right now, it's a bit of a coin flip. But how do you stand on this issue?
I'm the same way. Gladstone and Stone. Stone.
The
Wow.
Stones, yeah.
Both my front runners for sure. Uh, Honestly, I enjoyed Emma Stone's performance more. I think just because I liked Poor Things more as a film. But Lily Gladstone, the her having such a quiet, calm role, calm performance throughout most of the movie, I love so much. I love when a performance that isn't all showy and razzle dazzle is able to like really reel you in. And I'd almost like to see her win just for that. But like you said, she's not in the movie as much as I'd like her to be for someone that's considered a lead role, and that makes me hesitant to say, oh, she's going to take it home for sure.
Yeah, and there's another actor in this category that we're going to talk about later who I feel sort of also has a similar issue to not being fully lead compared to the other performers in the film. But this year really is a competition between what kind of acting do they wish to award, because Emma Stone very much is the over-the-top, very flamboyant performance where she's putting everything that she has into it. And Gladstone is so much about, you know, the stillness and the listening and the reacting. And I know you have a bit of experience with acting too, and it's one of those things where when I did acting in a scene, it makes so much difference when you have a scene partner who is fully there and invested while you are talking. It just makes your performance go through the roof. And what she does, I think, really helps elevate, you know, her co-stars' game as well, especially Leonardo DiCaprio. So much just standing, listening, stillness on her face still reads so much into it.
Oh yeah, the scene where it's raining and she has Leo just sit calm for a while. There's so little dialogue from her, but it's such a beautiful moment, and it's like 95% of the reason is because of her performance right there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great example of just her and her abilities throughout the entire movie.
Yeah, for sure. Moving on to Best Supporting Actor, we've got Robert De Niro here. He's up against Sterling K. Brown for American Fiction, Robert Downey Jr. for Oppenheimer, Ryan Gosling for Barbie, and Mark Ruffalo for Poor Things. And I said last week, this is probably the single most stacked category this year, where I am extremely happy with all of its nominees. The exception being Sterling K. Brown. I feel like he doesn't do enough, even though he's still very good in American Fiction. I don't think his role has enough to do to truly warrant a nomination. That said, this is such a stacked category. I'll let you sort of take the first word on this one, though. What are your thoughts on this category and on Robert De Niro's performance?
Just a quick question: Sterling K. Brown, does he play the brother in American Fiction?
Yes.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to know. I read the book.
Yeah,
so
he's
I
the gay
wasn't sure.
brother in that. Yeah.
Gotcha. De Niro in this movie is very De Niro to me. He's always great in every movie he's in. Um, I don't think that it's enough of a standout performance, kind of like we talked about with Scorsese as a director. It's a fantastic movie. It's a fantastic job. But when you compare it to everything else that he's done, this is kind of just another great De Niro performance. The Robert Downey Jr. was incredible this year. Even Ryan Gosling in a comedy role, I think, is worlds beyond what De Niro does in this movie.
Yeah, for me, I feel like this is De Niro's best performance in quite a long time. I sort of feel like he's really been turning in these sort of slapstick roles, and I don't just mean in comedy. I feel even in the dramas that he's been in, he's just sort of been phoning it in for 20 odd years, and it's been a real shame watching what some would call one of the greatest actors of the second half of the 20th century goes, sort of post Brando acting. He's right up there at the very top of the game. And this is, some of the best work he's done in a very long time. And I would counter this as one of the more memorable villain performances in cinema's history too. He does such a great job with it. Maybe this is just my bias of I really like this film, and I think De Niro is one of the reasons. I think he does such a great job as being one of the most truly evil characters we've seen on film, and the fact that he's based on a real person is always that much more unnerving as well. I have him as a dark horse, but that is a very weak dark horse that I have him at, because I do feel that at the top, we probably have Robert Downey Jr. is the front runner, and then I would probably say between Gosling and De Niro as next up to see who would win. But I think I would probably say Gosling is the true runner-up, where De Niro is probably safely in number 3. But it's a bit of a tighter race than maybe I would think. So that's where I have De Niro is a dark horse.
Yeah, I had him as a long shot, but almost like a upper tier long shot.
Then I think we're sort of in a similar vein where you can kind of slot him in that upper tier long shot, lower tier dark horse, and that's sort of in the vein of we think he's going to be maybe 3rd, maybe 4th. Who really knows?
Right.
All right, so the next category is best cinematography, and this is another very interesting category, and one that we're going to talk about later in the show as well. But it's up against El Conde, Maestro, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. I really like the cinematography in this. It was, very. I love Western movies, so that it always captures the beautiful landscapes, and I think Rodrigo Prieto, who did the cinematography of this, sort of captures similar things that we're used to, along with some really great Scorsese type shots as well that we're also used to. So I think he sort of combines the best of both worlds. That said, once again, this is probably a long shot. This is, a pretty stacked category, probably the number 3 or the number 4 movie. What about you?
I had it as a dark horse.
Okay.
I really enjoyed the cinematography. One of the early shots in the movie, where the woman puts the baby in the cradle and is shot through the window. I think that's just a perfect Scorsese style shot. There's no focus on the gun in the window, but if you're an eagle-eyed viewer on the first watch, you catch a glimpse and you have just enough time to be like, oh my god, and then it's too late. That's an example of like the action that I enjoy in the movie, but then, like you said, classic Western, beautiful landscapes. That being said, it's hard to call it a dark horse and not a long shot. I feel like there's 1 or 2 movies above it, so I keep putting it as like a low tier dark horse or an upper tier long shot. I don't know.
Yeah, because once again, I think Oppenheimer is the front runner for this, and then after that, it's a bit of a mixed bag where it's sort of what in cinematography do you prefer, and I think that's gonna really depend on how voters go. So it's really tough to say, because I think all 4 of the films, other than Oppenheimer, are all so different.
Yeah, each one, it's like you could go to a film class in a different college, and they'll be like, well, we're going to be talking about this style of filmmaking and this style, and they really are completely different from each other, but all incredibly like upper tier in their own respective genres, I guess, or styles.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to best film editing, and so this is up against Anatomy of a Fall, The Holdovers, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. It's a lot of the same category, the same movies in each of the categories. Much like cinematography, I'm putting this as a long shot. Yeah, I think tension. When I think editing, I think tension is a big component for me that I value highly. In that case, I would have it personally higher in my own rankings. But I think what Oppenheimer does with the non-linear timeline, what Poor Things does a little bit as well too. Anatomy of a Fall, with its very unique way to unveil a court drama room, a court case, is also going to be up there. So yeah, Killers of the Flower Moon. Once again, I'm having it as a long shot in this category.
And I have it as a dark horse, um, only because the timeline stuff in Oppenheimer, I'm just biased against it. Um, I don't know. I think that it does build a proper amount of tension in Killers of the Flower Moon, but not as expertly done as in Oppenheimer, despite the timeline.
Fair enough. Moving on to best production design, another stack category. It's up against Barbie, Napoleon, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. I really appreciate that they basically, built this whole Osage town and really decked it out, and it felt so lived in, this Wild West town. So I really appreciate what they did for that, and did some really great stuff. That said, it's in some pretty stiff competition as well. I'm putting it as a long shot, although you probably could convince me that it could be a dark horse, but I think Barbie, Napoleon, and Poor Things are all way ahead of it.
Yeah, I have this one as a long shot as well. I love a good Western town that they build from the ground up. I will always be a fan of that. But when you're comparing it to just the imagination that Barbie took, at least in Barbie Land,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then just everything in Poor Things was memorable to me. So that's kind of where my vote lies in production design.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely one of those things where, like, in 10, 20 years from now, if you're rewatching this movie, you're going to be like, wow, the production design, this is really incredible. But it's unfortunately not the type that wins Oscars.
Right. Yeah. Not in 2024.
Yeah. Maybe in 1954, but not
Right.
2024. All right, so let's go next to best costume design. This is also another bit of a tricky one where we're similarly to production design. I feel like it's really strong, and they do a great job of sort of giving us the whole gamut of the upper class to the lower class people that were living in this time in this city, and the different styles between the Osage costumes and the white costumes and everything that this sort of encompasses. I think they did a really great job with some really beautiful stuff. But it's up against Barbie, Napoleon, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. And yeah, once again, there's two really stacked films for costumes, and then Killers of the Flower Moon coming in with its subtlety, realism, all this sort of stuff. I have it as a long shot. It's sort of, once again, in that hovering between dark horse and long shot category, but I'm going to call it a long shot. What about you?
Yeah, I've got a dark horse / long shot written down in my notes, and I can really appreciate them putting the effort into accuracy in the Osage costumes and the wardrobe. I'll be honest, between this category and production design, this is one of the moments where I'm looking at the nominees and you see Killers of the Flower Moon and Barbie stacked up against each other. And I have a brief moment where I'm like, the Oscars are stupid. Like, why are we comparing these two completely different movies in any type of way to reward them with merit based on that? You know? And that's coming from someone that loves the Academy Awards every year. But it kind of bums me out where I'm like, someone's going to go home a loser and there's no reason for it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I understand what you're saying, especially when, like, you include things like genre bias at the Oscars, where comedies rarely get nominated. Luckily, this year we've got Barbie, which is, I would call it a comedy.
Yeah.
Even The Holdovers is kind of comedic too, and Poor Things. But like things like horror, thriller, science fiction, none of those movies ever make a dent at the Oscars. And you're trying to compare what different genres of movies do. It's so difficult because Killers of the Flower Moon is striving for hyper realism in terms of what was going on in the 1920s with a very specific part of America and what was going on there, and you're comparing it to Barbie, which is, pulling on the past of past Barbie costumes and the Barbie dream houses and things like that, and they're trying to recreate them faithfully, but it's not realistic in the terms of what is going on in the real world. You look at the scenes of like when Barbie and Ken go to the real world, that is not realism. That's played up for comedic effect.
Right. Very gray and dreary.
Mm-hmm. And then you got them in like their cowboy outfits and stuff like that too. So it's like it's such a huge contrast.
Yeah, really well done. It's just one of those things where I'm like, I love the Academy Awards, but also, God, they're dumb sometimes.
All right, let's talk about Best Original Score. Is up against American Fiction, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. I'll let you start this one off. I've been talking a lot, so I want to hear your thoughts on this category.
So I had this down as a long shot. I enjoy the score of this movie. Again, it's kind of like a upper tier long shot, lower tier dark horse. It's not my favorite score of the year. That would again go to Poor Things. But I think this has a really good chance with the touch of like the Osage traditional music mixed in with some of the more Western feeling music. Do you feel like why can't I remember his name? Who composed John Williams?
Robbie Robertson.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, John
Yeah, I
Williams.
was trying to remember. Do you feel like John Williams really has a shot at all this year just for being John Williams?
This is so tough because he's got the name recognition, and I feel this category more than a lot of the others. Often name recognition carries a lot of weight.
Yeah.
And this is supposedly once again his final score, and it is done for an iconic franchise where he is using a bit of his previous music. I'm a little surprised it was eligible, but it must have met the requirements in terms of a certain percentage that is original versus newly composed. But I really don't know what to do with John Williams. I feel like he's a true wild card in this entire category where I can see him winning and I can see him coming in fifth place. And it wouldn't surprise me wherever it sort of shakes out.
Yeah, it kind of throws a wrench into my whole ranking because who doesn't love John Williams? Is this his best score? No. Is it potentially his last? Yeah, and that I think that goes a long way with him. So because of that wild card nature, I have Killers of the Flower Moon, Dark Horse, Long Shot.
Now, speaking of last score, in a very morbid joke, this is Robbie Robertson's last score because he unfortunately died last year just after the movie premiered, I believe. He was the front man for the band. So if anyone's a fan of classic rock music, you definitely know Robbie Robertson's music. He's an incredible musician. And I think he does a really great job with this score. It's a lot more subtle compared to Ludwig Göransson's score in Oppenheimer, which is definitely the most score for this year. And oftentimes, most score is the one that wins. Poor Things, I would definitely say, is the most unique of the category, playing with the way we hear instruments is such a unique way to compose your score. And I think Poor Things does that very excellently. And I think personally, I probably have Poor Things as my number one as well, even though I really do like the Oppenheimer one too. But I wouldn't be shocked if maybe, they go, hey, Robbie Robertson, he is not known for his composing, but he has definitely composed quite a few movies. He has now passed away. Maybe it's their chance to sort of honor him as a career retrospective. I wouldn't be shocked either if that happens too. I do have this as a dark horse behind Oppenheimer and probably Poor Things, but it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world if they do end up awarding Robbie Robertson posthumously.
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like his passing would kind of be the push to have him take home the award.
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Especially me, myself, I'm a huge fan of the band and his work. So it is sad that we will no longer get any more new Robbie Robertson music.
yeah.
All right. The last category is Best Original Song, and the other nominees are The Fire Inside from Flamin' Hot.
Woo.
As we mentioned at the top of the show, our annual Diane Warren song.
Oh my God.
I'm Just Ken from Barbie. It Never Went Away from American Symphony. And What Was I Made For from Barbie. This is very clearly the year of Barbie. It's got 2 nominations in here. I'm not concerned about any sort of vote splitting. I think everyone is going to coalesce between What Was I Made For. But that said, I still think I'm Just Ken is probably going to be the very strong runner-up. And so you basically have 3 songs that are, in essence, just happy to be there. But I'm going to officially call A Song for My People as a long shot.
Yeah, I had it as a long shot too. I think if it has any chance of winning, it will be kind of, this sounds dirty saying this, but like an inclusion kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Barbie dominates this category by a long shot.
I know,
even if it only had one of the songs.
I was going to ask a question. I was going to ask a question about the Barbie songs, but I'm going to actually hold off on that until we get to them. So I'm going to save that.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, basically those are the 10 categories. I have it winning anywhere from 0 to 2 Oscars, which is, such a tough one to say because I don't think Lily Gladstone, I think, is the safest bet to win, but I think she's got such tough competition from Emma Stone that I can see this movie walking away with 0 awards. And if it was to get a second one, I would probably say it would be a toss-up between supporting actor and score. I don't know which one it would be, but I don't think it's going to win any more than 2 in that sort of like at its maximum. How many awards do you think this movie's going to win?
I'm going to go with a solid 1.
Yeah.
If anything, I would say Lily Gladstone. Beyond that, I think the competition is just too stiff this year.
Yeah. I'm in agreement with you there. All right, let us move on. The next film we're going to talk about is Barbie.
I'm just kidding. Anywhere else I'd be taken. Is it my destiny to live and die a life of blonde fragility? I'm just kidding. Where I see love, she sees a friend. What will it take for her to see the man behind the tent and fight for me?
So this is the new film directed by Greta Gerwig, and it's about Barbie and Ken are having the time of their lives in the colorful and seemingly perfect world of Barbie Land. However, when they get a chance to go to the real world, they soon discover the joys and perils of living amongst humans. So the movie is nominated for 8 awards, including Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor for Ryan Gosling, Best Supporting Actress for America Ferrera, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Costume Design, Best Production Design, Best Original Song for I'm Just Ken, and Best Original Song for What Was I Made For. So yeah, very quickly, what were your thoughts on the Barbie movie?
I had so much fun with this movie. It was a blast. I thought it was so funny, and I'm not a big comedy guy by any means. I've tried this year to go see more comedies in theaters to support the kind of dying genre. So it really made me happy to go catch a comedy movie and just have a blast with it.
It was a movie that I quite enjoyed a lot, but it just fell short of me loving it. But it was one that I was very happy to see, and had a lot of great laughs, had some good heart to it as well. Unfortunately, I think the Kens all sort of stole the show, just because they were so big and broad and comedic. That were some of the most memorable moments, which is why I think Ryan Gosling got his nomination. We'll talk about that when we get to that category. But yeah, I was a fan of this movie, I will say.
I think it's the best a Barbie movie could have been.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If you were to guess how it would turn out, I think this is definitely at the upper echelon of what we would have expected. All right, so let's talk about the odds for it to win Best Picture. So all that you just said about it, where do you have it ranked for Best Picture?
I have it set up as a dark horse. Uh, I mean, the Barbenheimer phenomenon earlier this year, people went and saw this movie, and I think just the craftsmanship that went into Oppenheimer really sets that as the front runner, as we've said numerous times now. But Barbie was seen by a lot of people, and I think a majority of those people just had a blast with it, just like I did. So it's definitely a dark horse.
Yeah, it's a dark horse for me, and it's once again in that same grouping of 4 movies that are underneath the 2 front runners, really. So it's in the same category for Killers of the Flower Moon for me, where it's like, yeah, it is. It just sort of depends on how people want to put it on their preferential ballot. And you're right. The fact that so many people saw it, it was the highest grossing movie of last year, I believe. That's really going to play a part, because it's not like anyone in the Academy is going to be doing catch-up homework on Barbie, because they probably all saw it already. Whereas some of these smaller movies, you know, it's like, well, do I have time to get around to Anatomy of a Fall? Do I have time to see The Zone of Interest? I'm going to have to squeeze that into my schedule, where everyone already has seen Barbie and has an opinion on it. So I wouldn't be shocked if it does maybe make it high up on quite a few people's ballots.
100%.
All right, let's move over to Best Supporting Actor. So this is a category we've already sort of touched on with Robert De Niro, and here we've got Ryan Gosling. And I think Ryan Gosling is probably second in line behind Robert Downey Jr. as most likely to win. I know he is giving a very comedic performance, which is something that the Academy doesn't usually reward, but he's normally a dramatic actor, and I think him showing his range of just how damn funny he was in this movie is going to go a long way for him in terms of people being fans of it, because he was truly excellent in so many unique and surprising ways, where literally every line reading he has, you can chalk it up as being one of the most quotable moments of the movie.
One of the most quotable moments of the year, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I have so many friends that, I mean, they are just Ken, you know, they connect so much with his character, and that's entirely because of Gosling's performance. It's incredible. It's so funny.
Yeah, I think especially when he's up against a bunch of other actors playing a Ken role too, and they're all sort of giving similar vibes from each other, where they're all this sort of hyper faux masculinity, not really sure where they are in the world, but exuding so much dumb confidence, basically. He still stands out amongst them all too.
Oh yeah, he feels like the leader of the Kens, where they're all great, but he was definitely voted as the most interesting by all of the other Kens. Man, I love it so much. I love that Gosling, even in his dramatic roles, he always gets a moment or two where he gets to be funny. There's quite a few moments in La La Land where he's got some good comedic delivery, and this really gave him the opportunity to shine through and show, like you said, just how funny he can be.
He's the type of performer that, like, I'm almost mad that he does so many dramatic performances, even though he's amazing in them, because every time he does a comedic performance or comedic movie, he just absolutely steals the show. I think of something like The Nice Guys, which is probably one of my favorite comedies of, you know, the last decade or so. And he's so good in that movie. And once again, he shows up in Barbie and just absolutely crushes the comedy. Every line from him is gold. Every reaction shot, you know, the fact that he has all these stupid costumes, but he sells it so well every single time. To me, he is the superior Ryan in Hollywood, especially Canadian Ryan.
100%. Oh, God. Don't get me started on that. You know, this is embarrassing, but before I went and saw Barbie, this is one of my favorite moments in Barbie. This makes me sound like such an annoying guy, but every once in a while I'll go live on my Instagram and just kind of play guitar, because I like playing guitar. It's fun. And I enjoy Matchbox 20 quite a bit. I have struggled so hard to pick up my guitar after seeing Barbie because I don't want to play guitar at anybody. God, it was so funny.
That's really funny. That's really funny.
Yeah, so sorry to everybody if you ever catch me on Instagram and I'm playing guitar. I promise I'm not trying to be as pretentious as I probably seem.
All right, let's move on to Best Supporting Actress. So this is now the first time we'll be talking about tonight. The first and only time we'll actually be talking about it tonight. And America Ferrera is up against Emily Blunt from Oppenheimer, Danielle Brooks from The Color Purple, Jodie Foster from Nyad, and Divine Joy Randolph from The Holdovers. I am putting America Ferrera in the just happy to be there category at the very bottom alongside Jodie Foster, where I think this was such a surprise that she even got nominated. And I personally wasn't really happy with her nomination just because I thought her dialogue, especially her big speech near the end, was just so on the nose and sort of, boiled down what we were already seeing and knowing watching the movie's themes, and then having it in such a overt monologue just sort of ruined the character a little bit, which, isn't America Ferrera's fault. I think that's the screenplay's fault. But unfortunately, I personally hold that against America Ferrera for that, even though otherwise I think she does a fairly solid job. But she's right at the bottom of this category for me. What about you?
I had her as a long shot only because I've only seen 3 of the nominees in this category. In a movie that relies so much on comedy and where Ryan Gosling excels, she didn't do a whole lot in this movie to warrant the nomination. It really kind of feels like they ran out of actors to choose from a pool. And they were like, well, Barbie's popular. Let's stick her in there because we can't do Margot Robbie, obviously, for supporting actress. So we'll just do America. That'll be all right. And that it doesn't feel warranted at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was, like I said, it was the biggest surprise probably for me of all the Oscar nominations, where I was like, really? America Ferrera? I know she had a little bit of momentum and a bit of push behind her, but I was still very surprised. And she's someone who I generally have enjoyed watching her throughout her career, so I am happy that she can, say that she's an Oscar nominee, and congratulations, because I don't know how many, big meaty movie roles she's going to get in her career, since she is mostly a television actor. But still, good for her, and I'm very happy, and hopefully she enjoys this time of the year for her.
Hopefully it leads to more big roles like this, because she's fantastic and she deserves it. Just kind of a weird nomination.
Mm-hmm. All right, next up, we've got Best Adapted Screenplay, and it is up against American Fiction, Oppenheimer, Poor Things, In the Zone of Interest. And this is, between the two categories, I would say it's probably the most stacked one of the two. You've got Oppenheimer, the front runner for Best Picture, Poor Things, Zone of Interest, all very strong ones. American Fiction, I think the screenplay is probably the highlight of the movie for a lot of people. So this is a really tough one. Where do you have it ranked?
It's almost, it's confusing why it's even in this category. I have it as just happy to be here, because it's based on a doll. There's no story that pre-existed. You're taking something like the American Prometheus, a giant biography on one of the most influential scientists of all time, and creating a 3+ hour movie that it just stands out incredibly. And then it's up against the adaptation of a doll, which I love Barbie, but it just doesn't make any sense to even be in this category.
I think the fact that, one, I think the big issue is that this was originally a original screenplay. In most other award shows, it's considered original, but the Oscars have very strange stipulations about what they consider to be adapted, and the fact that it is pre-existing intellectual property as a character makes it adapted, which I know a lot of people are still sort of struggling to wrap their heads around. The Oscars have long put things that are even unpublished, they have still considered that adapted. It is not based on, previously published materials or things like that, where other award shows are a little less strict with it. So because of that, this is why it's an adapted. It was actually a shakeup that only happened, about 2 months before the nominations came out, because it was looking like one of the front runners for original screenplay, and then it goes to the much more stacked adapted category. It's really tough. I think you're right of what you were saying about Oppenheimer, where being able to condense a very scientific book into a thrilling narrative is really what's going to go in its favor. That said, I think the fact that they managed to, we talked about this with Best Picture, if we were to do a scale of how good a potential Barbie movie could have been, this was obviously on the highest end possible that I think most of us would have expected, and that it made over $1 billion at the box office. Like, I think these things are going to, carry some weight for it. I am putting this in the dark horse category. Obviously, it's very tough behind Oppenheimer and probably Poor Things, but I think it's right up there with Poor Things as maybe a number 2.
And that makes sense, because when it comes to a screenplay, it is incredible. It's a great movie. It just really still doesn't make any sense. Like Maestro, you're making a movie about Leonard Bernstein. I know he's not an intellectual property, but you're still adapting it from his life. It's just bizarre to me. I get what you're saying, and I agree that it's an incredible screenplay. It doesn't, for me, it doesn't have a chance of winning.
Fair enough. Okay. Moving on, we've got Best Costume Design, and we talked about costume a bit for Killers of the Flower Moon. And the fact, what I loved about the costume design in Barbie was the pictures that you saw afterwards and seeing how lovingly recreated from actual Barbie dolls from the 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way through the Barbie timeline up until today, and how they basically are remaking these costumes from already existing designs and doing them so perfectly and suiting them to all the different Barbies and the Kens and Alan and everything like that. They do such a good job of bringing this, big playful nature and grounded reality together in one, which was such a fascinating thing to look at. And like all the matching Barbie and Ken outfits, just absolutely incredible. I am having this as a front runner because I think it's one of those things where it's the most costumes, much like we were talking about the score, the most score. So I think that's really going to lend credence in its favor. What about you?
I also had this as front runner, kind of a dark horse at the same time. It When I take another look at the category, I almost want to call it best adapted costume for 4 of the films, because with Barbie, you make the point about they're looking back at the history of Barbie and Ken, and they're pulling these outfits from the property's history and creating them meticulously down to every detail. But the same can really be said for Killers of the Flower Moon, Napoleon, and Oppenheimer. You're taking all of these things from history and you're recreating them. When it comes to this category overall, I think I like when a costume department is able to just create something brand new and fresh with maybe influences from other things, but it's a very original concept. And that's why I like Poor Things so much in this category.
Mm-hmm.
But Barbie's kind of doing what 3 of the other films are doing. It's just there is more of it, like you said. There are so many costumes. So it does kind of sit as a front runner, dark horse. Kind of depends on what style or genre you're looking at, what you prefer.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's move on to best production design. And once again, we talked about this a little bit with Killers of the Flower Moon, and I think the fact that Barbie caused a worldwide shortage of a certain kind of pink paint really helps it as far as winning best production design. Much like in costume design, they were recreating, past Barbie dream houses to make Barbie Land, and it was so familiar looking and but also so unique in its own thing. And seeing how these, toys were upscaled to fit the size of humans was just such a great job, and it's so playful and fun. I have it as a front runner. What about you?
Oh, I wrote long shot, but that's definitely not right. Ignore my notes that you can't even see. I just like costume design. I have it as a front runner / dark horse for the same reasons. You're pulling things from history or pre-existing material, and not you're just bringing it to life or bringing it back from the history books, and I love it. I think Barbie, more so than Napoleon Oppenheimer or Flower Moon, it's almost like if you go to a theme park like Universal Studios, for example, and you walk into like the Harry Potter world and you're like, wow, I can't believe they recreated this from my favorite movie. That's what it was like sitting in Barbie and going to Barbie Land. You're like, wow, I remember seeing these toys on the shelves, or my sister played with this exact dream house, and here it is in life-size version. And it almost touches on like a nostalgic nerve for a lot of people, and I think that will push it forward when it comes to voting.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it too. Yeah. Let's move on to the next category, which is Best Original Song. And there are two nominees from this, which is I'm Just Ken and What Was I Made For? So we'll talk about them together. And I think that they are dual front runners, even though I think What Was I Made For is the one that's going to be the winner for this. And I think what's most fascinating is this was a song written by Billie Eilish. She's 22 years old and probably about to win her second Oscar for Best Original Song, which is just absolutely crazy, especially when you compare it to Diane Warren, who I believe is in her 60s or 70s and has well over a dozen nominations and no wins. But maybe Diane Warren should try writing better songs.
I will donate to a Kickstarter for anybody that is willing to put together a documentary that explains why Diane Warren keeps getting nominated for Best Original Song. What is she? Who is she paying? You know?
Well, I think you're in luck because there is a documentary about Diane Warren being made that's going to be coming out this year. So we could very well have a Best Original Song from Diane Warren in a movie about
I know.
Diane
I'm
Warren.
gonna have to watch this documentary just because she'll be nominated for it. Oh, it's absurd. Um,
Yes, it is. But what do you think about these two songs?
they're both great. I'm Just Ken is so much fun, and What Was I Made For? I think really hit home with a lot of people. I mean, it's like a TikTok trending song, like people love it. It's a great song. It's Billie Eilish. She's one of the most popular pop stars probably of all time, certainly of this generation. Uh, that's the one I think will take home the win for sure. Are you a Billie Eilish fan?
I like some of her music, but I'm not like super into her.
Yeah, like I like her hits for sure. Everything that she does for film, or even when a movie just uses one of her songs, I think it always fits really well. I I don't know. She's catchy, man. She's really catchy.
So the question I wanted to ask back in Killers of the Flower Moon was, do you think that there's any possibility of vote splitting happening because Barbie has two nominees in this category? Do you think there's a chance that I'm Just Ken and What Was I Made For get, close to an equal amount of votes, which leads neither to win and allowing another movie to swoop in? Do you think that's a realistic chance of happening? Or will everyone coalesce behind What Was I Made For?
I think even if there is a vote split, the number of votes towards Barbie in general in this category, even if it's almost equal, there will just be too many to give any other film a chance.
Mm-hmm.
It would be like 80% of the overall votes split between the two. So there's just, they're so far ahead, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat too, where I do think they are going to just get such a plurality of the votes that no one else has a shot to even get close. Okay, so let's talk about our... Oh, wait, no, before we get there. I have this winning between 2 and 3 awards. One definitely for original song, and then I think it's going to be a toss-up between whether it wins costume or production. I don't think it's going to win both, but I think it's definitely going to get one of them. How many awards do you think the film's going to win?
Yeah, I would probably say 2. It's definitely getting original song, and then it's kind of a toss-up between costume and production, as you said. But everything else... Oh, you know what? Yeah, maybe 3 just because of Gosling.
Mm-hmm.
He really does have a shot, and I would just be so happy to see that.
Yeah, me too. All right, so let's talk about our last film, which is Maestro. This love story chronicles the lifelong relationship of conductor-composer Leonard Bernstein and actress Felicia Montenegro Bernstein. So that doesn't really tell you much about the movie, but this is Bradley Cooper's latest film that he directed and stars in, and is nominated for 7 awards, including Best Picture, Best Actor for Bradley Cooper, Best Actress for Carey Mulligan, Best Original Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, and Best Sound. So let's start with Best Picture. And for me, I think as much as we are trying to figure out where to place Barbie and Killers of the Flower Moon, I don't think there's much struggle of where to place Maestro. And I'm having it as just happy to be there, right at the very bottom, with probably maybe Past Lives and depending on how you feel about American Fiction. I think the 3 of them sort of make, the bottom tier of movies most likely to win. What about you?
I had it as a long shot, but there's still, I believe, nearly half of the nominations that I haven't seen yet, or the nominees rather. So it could very well be just happy to be there. I'll get back to you when I've seen more of them.
We'll need to do an updated segment. All right, that's fair. What about Best Actor? We've got Bradley Cooper. He's been gunning for an Oscar for quite a while now. He now has 12 nominations total. A bunch of them are for producing different movies, but some of them are for acting, some of them are for screenplay, some of them are for directing. He's all over the board, really trying to... I guess I would say he's trying to become the new Clint Eastwood in terms of a man who sort of does everything but never really the winner. I have him sort of firmly in the just happy to be there category, because I think there is 2 performances right at the very top, and that's Paul Giamatti and Cillian Murphy, who are right at the top, and then legendary Jeffrey Wright sort of has the he's overdue narrative behind him, and then you've got Bradley Cooper and Coleman Domingo sort of coming up at the rear.
Yeah, again, I haven't seen... I haven't seen 3 of these movies as well, but I had put Bradley Cooper as a long shot. I actually thought his performance in Maestro was very impressive. I'm not the biggest Jeffrey Wright fan, honestly. Yeah, I know that this is going to sound awful. I watched Westworld, and you know how he wears his glasses really low on his nose? That really
Hmm.
bothered me. And I think it kind of tainted my opinions of him. He's always been kind of the same type of character or the same type of performance in everything I've seen him in. And I've not seen American Fiction yet, but I did read the book. And just based off of the character displayed in the book, I feel like he's just going to kind of play that same character again. And that kind
Wow.
of
Okay.
bumps Bradley Cooper up above at least that for me. And then I'm not sure about Coleman Domingo. He's a pretty solid actor. I'm sure he does a good job.
So I just want to say here, so like if you can say your email address out loud, so that way any hate mail gets directed straight to you and not to me. I don't want to be involved in any of this Jeffrey Wright slander.
Like what? I'm gonna need some references, not references, some referrals of what I should be watching to really appreciate Jeffrey Wright. If you could send those to me after the show,
Sure, yeah.
I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. Everyone's got their taste. I get it. And the fine wine that is Jeffrey Wright does not work for you.
I hope it does one day. I do.
All right, let's move on to Best Actress. And we've got Carey Mulligan here. And we've talked about this category a little bit. I have Carey Mulligan as a just happy to be there. She's got such stiff competition between Lily Gladstone and Emma Stone, and I think Sandra Hüller is probably the next most likely after the two of them to sort of get some momentum behind her. And I think Carey Mulligan's right at the back with Annette Bening for just happy to be there.
Yeah, that's probably right. The only one I haven't seen is Sandra Hüller. Again, I thought Carey Mulligan was great in this, but great is surprisingly just not good enough when compared to the other nominees. So probably a just happy to be there. Maybe a long shot, depending on how I feel about Anatomy of a Fall.
Yeah. I would say, I was mentioning it a little bit with the Lily Gladstone when we were talking about whether or not she's lead or supporting. Carey Mulligan, while she's in a good chunk of this movie, kind of feels a bit like a bit of a supporting performance. And if she had gotten in there, maybe she would have had a better chance to win. But yeah, do you have any sort of thoughts on lead or supporting for her here?
I think in Killers of the Flower Moon, there are a lot more characters at any given time. And I think that kind of aids in pushing Lily Gladstone to kind of making sense for supporting. Whereas in Maestro, it's really just Bradley Cooper and Carey Mulligan. There aren't a whole lot of other actors going on, so she kind of falls more easily into the lead category.
Yeah, yeah, that's probably fair. It was just one of those things where like you can probably put it in either way and see the argument
Yeah,
for
for
both.
sure. I think if you did move Carey Mulligan to supporting, you would probably also move Lily Gladstone, and then it would just cancel Carey out.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. All right, let's talk about best original screenplay, and we talked about that with actually we haven't talked about that yet because both the other two movies were adapted screenplays. So it's up against Anatomy of a Fall, The Holdovers, May December, and Past Lives. Unfortunately, I think the script for Maestro is probably the single weakest part of it because the common complaint is that like, hey, I don't really know a ton about Leonard Bernstein personally other than his music, and then you watch Maestro and you don't really learn a lot about him in this movie or his relationship. It just we sort of see things happen, but we don't really learn any great detail about it. And so I think that's really going to hold the movie back, especially since Anatomy of a Fall and The Holdovers. Really, I think all four are such strong screenplays that that Maestro is really going to falter and is the strongest just happy to be there in this entire category, where it is a safe 5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, Unfortunately, the other four movies I've not seen, but I've heard so much specifically about their screenplays, people just really enjoyed the holdovers so much. And Past Lives, I think, is probably outside of like Barbenheimer, probably the most talked about movie of the year, especially early in the year, um, specifically for its screenplay. So, like you said, Maestro kind of just goes through almost like the spark notes of Bernstein's life, and it doesn't give you an opportunity to linger on any of the events. It's just happy to be there.
All right, let's talk about cinematography. We talked about that with Killers of the Flower Moon. I think it's just a happy to be there as well. It's black and white, so it's very for some of it, it's some of its color, so it's very beautifully shot. We sort of get similar things with Oppenheimer, where it sort of goes back and forth between the black and white and the color photography. El Conde's in black and white as well, so it's actually a great year for black and white cinematography, and it looks really nice. But I don't think it really does anything unique or special. So I am just happy to be there for this nominee.
I had put it as a dark horse slash maybe a long shot. I actually really
Okay.
enjoyed the cinematography. One of the most memorable shots that I saw last year or this year is where Carey Mulligan first steps off of the bus, and it's a really basic shot, kind of a wide frame, and the bus pulls up, and she just kind of walks down the street towards the camera. There's nothing real special, but the way everything is framed, and then the paired with the swelling of the music, that probably gives it a little bit of an edge. It was beautiful. It was so beautiful. Um, Realistically, though, I don't think it's going to take home the win, but I was more impressed with the cinematography, I think, than it sounds like you were.
Mm.
Not a big fan that, even though the black and white was beautifully shot, they did kind of the basic, this takes place in the past, so it is black and white. Felt very
Yeah.
film school 101, I guess.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. All right, let's move on to the next category, which is best makeup and hairstyling. And so this category, well, this nomination originally caused a bit of a fuss when first images were released of Bradley Cooper playing Leonard Bernstein. Bradley Cooper, who is not Jewish, and Leonard Bernstein, who is Jewish, has a very large nose that is larger than his Leonard Bernstein's actual nose. And so that originally caused a bit of controversy. But the family of Bernstein came out immediately with a statement being like, hey, no, we were okay. We actually approve the makeup and think that he looks a lot like our dad and, our family member. And so we have zero complaints about this. And then sort of since then, the dialogue around it has mostly disappeared. I think that they managed to sort of shut down any sort of complaints about it being anti-Semitic pretty quickly. I'm imagine some people probably still feel that way, and that's perfectly valid. But it's up against Golda, Oppenheimer, Poor Things, in Society of the Snow, and so it's sort of interesting. This group of films, doesn't really have a real stranglehold from one movie or another. And I think Maestro, the fact that they do such a good job with the old age makeup specifically, making Bradley Cooper look like Leonard Bernstein, and in the later stages of his life, they did such a great job with that. I think this is the front runner for this, even though this category overall is pretty weak. What would you say?
Yeah, I'm honestly surprised Barbie didn't get a nomination for this,
Mm-hmm.
because just like costumes, there's so much hair and makeup. But I'm kind of with you, Maestro. The aging, especially, is very impressive. Um, I I also, I don't know. I don't know. I love Poor Things kind of for the same reason I mentioned earlier, where it's doing something original. Everything that Emma Stone's character Bella gets just adds to her character in a big way. I love how long her hair gets, and that is a part of her character. Um, And then Willem Dafoe looked awesome if you're talking prosthetics. But Maestro, did you see Golda?
I did, and I think they do a really good job of making Helen Mirren look like Golda Meir, the first prime minister of Israel. Unfortunately, I think that movie is so tone deaf and the wrong movie at the wrong time specifically that I don't think it has any sort of chance. This movie is basically akin to Poison right now. It is not a good movie, and despite the fact that it's got some solid makeup work, I don't think it stands a chance at all.
Yeah, I don't think that it would win, regardless of how impressive its hair and makeup are. I just think it's the easiest to compare when it comes specifically to that with Maestro. Yeah,
as far as going for realism, and things
right.
like that,
so I'll probably put it as the front runner, even though I really want Poor Things to take it.
All right, and then the last category we have is best sound, and honestly, I was actually quite impressed with the sound in this film. Specifically, there's that one concert scene where Bradley Cooper is conducting uninterrupted for like a 5 to 7 minute span in a church, and it's very gorgeous sound. Like they recorded it live. That was a real orchestra. And I think they do such a good job of capturing music in this. I am going to call it a dark horse candidate, even though I think that it does really well. It's up against The Creator, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, Oppenheimer, and The Zone of Interest. My personal vote would go to The Zone of Interest, but I think Oppenheimer might be the one to win. But I will say that Maestro is probably a dark horse behind those two front runners. What about you?
I would also consider it a dark horse. In a weird way, I think Oppenheimer's the front runner because you finally have a Nolan movie where the sound is okay. So it's almost like the Academy is going to be like, he finally learned. Let's give it to him so he keeps doing
this
it
again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a very funny but accurate way to maybe look at how they might vote. Overall, I have this winning one category, and I don't really see a path for any more than one win. What about you?
Yeah, kind of a 0 to 1. Probably the 1 being the hair and makeup.
Okay. Well, that is 3 of the movies, and we've got our last Best Picture breakdown coming next week, where we're going to break down 4 more movies, and that will wrap up the 10. But Kyle, I really want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a real pleasure, as always. If people want to follow you, where's the best place to do so?
If you'd like to follow me specifically, and just me, Instagram at Kyle of OUTAO. You can watch me do all of my trying to get into the film industry stuff there. And if you'd like to follow my podcast, you can. That's Once Upon a Time at the Oscars. Dakota mentioned earlier at the top of the show. Still on hiatus, but one day we'll be back to it.
Nice. And as I had also mentioned, you did do a review of the new Marvel show Echo for my site. So I will link to that in the show notes so people can check that out. And hopefully maybe some more reviews from you in the future too.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, this has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at ContraZoomPod. How do you think Killers of the Flower Moon, Barbie, and Maestro will do at the Oscars? Send an email to ContraZoomPod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.